I'm Kevin Horde. It's the 18th of March. It is Monday. Sorry, we're running a few minutes late. Had some technical difficulties, and now we're here. But we're also very fortunate to have one of our semi-regular special guests, Dave Huguenel, who is um, uh, a renowned political consultant and advisor to many a campaign, but also including here in Oregon, where he has a lot of experience, but also worked in the 2020 Trump war room, which almost feels like the war room never really closed. It's just it keeps transformed into other versions of the war room over the years. But we're really lucky to have him here with us tonight to talk about what's happened in the last month. A lot has changed, both on the national scene, but also as we watch what's happening down in the trenches. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin, for having me. It's always a pleasure. I am hoping to climb that mountaintop from going from semi-regular to regular. Is that like two more, three more of these things? How long until I get like the plaque in the mail?
We haven't created an official status for that yet, so you actually might end up being the definition of regular here.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm getting promoted live on the show. I love it.
You are. Actually, I'd say you've probably been on once a month, and it's funny because it's just enough time for like a zillion things to happen between it. Because a month ago, where were we? We were looking at the presidential race. We had not been through most of the primaries. I think maybe we had done. It was the 12th of February, so I think we had done like New Hampshire and Iowa, right. And we were starting to head into some of these other ones. And I think we all had a pretty good idea of where things were going, but there's a lot of moving parts to this. There's all these court cases swirling around. There were the different candidates that were in and not in. There's the investigations of Joe Biden. There's the circumstances around what's happening in the country with inflation and so on. And then there's all these other races that are panning out. And then there's the potential of a government shutdown that keeps getting, kicked down the road a little bit. That could affect the political climate. And did I forget anything? The 1 year anniversary of, or the 2 year, is it the 2 year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, which seems to be on the annual commemoration list now. There's just a ton happening. What if you had to summarize where you think things are at right now that we know we have a presumptive nominee and a new RNC chair and co-chair, how do things look now?
So, I mean, I think they look exciting for a lot of different reasons. I mean, to your point, a lot can happen in a month. We went from being in the middle of presidential primary season into the very beginnings of general election season. Obviously, we had Super Tuesday, which is usually kind of like the major calling for any presidential primary that's that's somewhat competitive. This one never really was, but Super Tuesday ended up being the moment where all of President Trump's opponents at officially at that point had given up and realized what most people that pay attention to this stuff have known for a while, that Trump is the nominee. He has the support of the Republican Party, and he is going to be facing Joe Biden in November. So that, I think, is the biggest part. I mean, obviously, we can get into some of the bigger changes with the RNC. We have a new RNC chairman, the state party chairman from North Carolina, Doug Whatley.
It's Michael, isn't it?
Michael Whatley. I'm sorry. Yeah. I know a Doug Whatley, which is I went to high school with Doug Whatley, so I keep making that mistake.
Well, and the co-chair is Laura Trump.
Yeah, co-chair is Laura Trump. Some big changes there. You also got a new national committee man in Oregon, so you even have your own change out there as well.
Yep.
So that's one of the things that tends to happen during primary season. You start to see these changes. You see people coalesce behind their preferred candidates, and we're seeing more and more of that. Obviously, Oregon doesn't have its primary elections until May. But even with the way that some of the filings have, you had your filing week last week in Oregon running for office in the state, whether it be state senate, state representative, things of that nature. And even in Oregon, if I recall, I mean, you have a few local primaries here and there, kind of scattered throughout the state, but most of your big races don't really have what I would consider competitive primaries. Even with Congresswoman Lori Chavez Dreamer, she drew 0 opponents in the Republican primary, which I think sends a very clear message that Republicans are united and ready to win that seat again. Whereas Democrats still have this very competitive, messy primary to deal with. So,
yeah.
Long answer to a simple question. A lot's going on. Democrats have some messy primaries. Republicans seem a little more unified, and we're making some big changes.
In Lori's race, the Democrats, they had a 3-way race. Then I think and then maybe somebody else, like a 4th candidate, came in, and then one of the candidates dropped out. The one that runs Metro, I think.
And Peterson dropped out.
Yeah, and then she endorsed Janelle Bynum, the former state representative. And then there's been this massive intervention by the DCCC, which is the entity that supposedly stays neutral until after the primary, on behalf of Janelle Bynum. But the one who was the nominee 2 years ago was Jamie McLeod Skinner. So they, as you said, they're having a big battle there. It's like a fight within the Democrat Party on that side.
I am, I will say I am definitely looking forward to seeing who between Janelle or Jamie McLeod Skinner can outwoke each other. I think that's so. Looking forward to seeing how that battle plays out over the next few weeks and few months, for that matter.
Yeah, 2 different brands of woke fighting each other, and but also there's CD6, which we don't know exactly where that's going to go, but it looks pretty obvious that that the nominee from 2 years ago, Mike Erickson, is heading to be the nominee again. I think the last time we talked, that was before Denise Bowles had dropped out.
Yeah.
And so, and then there's a candidate that I recognize that I don't think raises much of any money. And so that one is an interesting shift. It's now not much of a question, but it is against an incumbent, Andrea Salinas, who for the most part, I guess, has kept her head down, is what I've noticed.
Yeah.
And then the 4th district, there's a 2-way race in the Republican primary, Monique Despain, and then there's another candidate, Amy Ryan Courser. And there's big differences between the two, I think. In particular, that Monique Despain is actually from the district, and Amy Ryan Courser is running from way outside of it. And that's pretty unusual. You don't see that too often. You see it sometimes, but not that often. And Val Hoyle doesn't have an opponent in the primary, but she does have a federal investigation that's chasing her down. Since the last time you and I talked, she got subpoenaed.
I was going to say, I think for the purpose of Val Hoyle, you can call the DOJ her primary opponent.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, she has a direct primary opponent, and that is that federal investigation, which is a subpoena of all her Bureau of Labor and Industry records relating to LaModa, which is the company related that was being investigated, along with Shemia Fagan, the former Secretary of State, who they helped bring down. And it's the subpoena is for the records that relate to this illegal grant of funds that Val Hoyle shoved through, and got as like a $500,000 grant given for 4 positions, including one that was just like a $97,000 executive director job of, marijuana internship. I don't know. It just sounds like something out of Pineapple Express, but it's that is where she is stuck right now. Plus, she is in the minority, right? So she's kind of struggling to get anything done, because she's not one of these reach across the aisle moderates for the most part. She's been sticking pretty closely with Hakeem Jeffries on all the votes that take place. So that it's interesting how each one of these races has its own dynamic right now.
Yeah, and I think Val Hoyle definitely made an interesting calculation in terms of her votes. I mean, her votes strike me as someone that is eyeing Democratic leadership within the Democratic Conference in DC long term, which means that you have to vote yes. Well, I guess in her case, you have to vote no a lot, meaning you have to vote with your party. And if you're in the minority party, you're going to be voting no with Hakeem Jeffries on a lot of stuff, or you're voting in favor of more liberal things that they want to try to get done as a conference. That's something that can be a little dicey if you're in a swing district, because those votes might ingratiate yourself with the Democratic Conference leadership, but it doesn't necessarily help you win or maintain votes in your congressional district. If it's a swing seat, if it's a deep red seat or a deep blue seat, it's a little bit easier, which is why you typically see a lot of leadership from either party come from these sort of safer districts. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, who was in one of the most liberal districts in the country. And you even look at McCarthy or Mike Johnson now, right? Those are very safe Republican districts. So Val Hoyle kind of playing that game in a district that is, A, she's a freshman, and then B, there's nothing that says that is a safe Democrat district, right? Might be able to say leans Democrat, maybe even certain years it strongly leans Democrat, but it's not a safe seat. So I think that could end up causing some problems for her down the road, but time will tell.
And I think that we're seeing also on both parties, obviously Lori has a lot of support in her race and strong support from the national level because they know how important the race is. I don't have enough information about CD6 yet. I know CD4 today, Cliff Bentz just endorsed Monique Despain, 4th District. And so that one is perhaps what you start to see as people begin to realize what the state of the play is in different races. And those races are going to, these races in Oregon actually could determine who controls Congress. It's one place where there's some variances, right?
Sure.
Where things could move either way. We also have lost some seats due to redistricting, if I understand correctly, in New York, and is it North Carolina? And I even saw that there was some redistricting that was forced through in the middle of Washington State very recently. And it's all the redistricting that's been forced after the redistricting was done for 2022 is pretty much not redounded to the benefit of Republicans in those states.
Right. Well, it's one of the things that I've talked about Oregon before, my time out there. As a Republican, you kind of feel like you're behind enemy lines, like you're in a blue state. You don't really get a lot of attention from the national committees, right? Historically, you just don't see the RNC or these DC committees targeting stuff. This is going to be a very rare exception this year where, it is not hyperbolic for me to say that if you're a Republican activist or a Republican voter looking to get involved in campaigns, this is the year to do it in Oregon because you're really on the front lines. To Kevin's point, there are, Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer's district is one of the top defense seats in the country. That's well documented. If you're looking at places on the West Coast that Republicans can win, there's only a handful of real opportunities. There's one, maybe I'd really say one. Some people would say two potential pickups in Washington State. Maybe one in California. That's an actual pickup.
Yeah, because California is where we picked up a lot last time.
Yeah. There's still one, maybe two out there, but really, I mean, all of the potential pickups on the West Coast are really in Oregon, whether it be CD4 or CD6, and that is that on top of the fact that there's an incumbent Republican Congresswoman in Oregon 5 to defend, you're going to see a lot of involvement and a lot of attention spent on Oregon that you historically don't see. It's gonna look and feel a little bit different, which I think, again, if you're an activist or if you're a volunteer in Oregon, like that should be really exciting to you because you're not behind enemy lines anymore. You're on the front lines with a lot of really important things that are going to shape the direction of this country.
And it means we can't spectate because sometimes I think we get complacent in states where we normally think we're not in play. Right. Yes, it's true that the presidential election, if the presidential election comes down to Oregon being in play, then it's probably doomsday for the Democrats. in the presidential race. But when it comes to these congressional seats, as you said, we probably need to get people to wake up a little bit and realize, whoa, if I donate, if I get out and I volunteer, if I go get a yard sign, if I do anything to help, that could be the 350 votes that we didn't get otherwise that I could make a big impact on.
Right. And look, and to your point, Kevin, obviously voting for president and making sure we elect a Republican president in November is extremely important. But as we all know, if President Trump walks into the Oval Office in January of 2025, and he's got a Democratic Congress and a Democratic Senate that he has to try to get legislation through, that's a really tough first term, and it's really hard to enact the types of changes that need to be made in this country without a unified government under the Republican banner. So, that's why, again, just Oregon is in this unique, at least in my political lifetime, I just can't think of a time where Oregon was this important in the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years.
Yeah, and I know we used to be getting some resources for the presidential races, but it was always kind of like an outside speculative pickup. You'd have to go all the way back to 2000 or maybe 2004 where they thought we had a decent chance.
Yeah.
But then we didn't really look at the congressional races even back then and think, well, hey, we're on a knife's edge with these congressional races. And also we weren't, even if there were some competitive races, we weren't a factor in whether or not nationally Republicans would control Congress. And all these things, some of which we can talk about here tonight that are factoring into the presidential race, all these things that are going on with investigations, with people that are pursuing oversight of different parts of the federal government and what they've been up to and what they've been doing, wouldn't be happening at all. The latest thing, which was very interesting, is that it turns out that an issue that a few years ago Republicans would have not been very pleased to have as an issue in the election, the events of January 6th and the investigation into it, actually starting to backfire on Democrats because there are people that were members of Congress on that committee who may well be facing referral for criminal prosecution to the Department of Justice, according to the people that are conducting the investigation of the investigation. They hid documentation, they destroyed or have concealed documentation that was testimony, congressional testimony. Some of it, they can't get to it because it's protected by a password that no one will give them. Others, it was, for instance, testimony that has now been revealed, at least in part, that said that these myths that were created, including one by somebody who's constantly modified their testimony, that President Trump tried to grab the wheel of a car and drive to the Capitol building. Turns out the Secret Service agent said, didn't happen, and I was the Secret Service agent.
Yeah.
And now it's becoming clear that maybe that was it wasn't just theater. It was potentially a criminal manipulation of congressional records and of the public. And we are only finding this out because we actually control Congress by just a couple of seats now.
Right. And while that's important, I mean, the other thing I would add too is I think the political, and again, I'm a political guy, I think in terms of just strategy, right? The strategic misstep that I think Democrats made was by focusing on this sort of defend democracy, January 6th, all of the stuff surrounding that, is they lost touch with what voters are truly concerned about. They were going over that stuff. We were hitting record high inflation, seeing soaring energy costs, seeing record number of illegal immigrants crossing our border, dealing with a drug overdose crisis in our country that is unprecedented, with fentanyl and all sorts of stuff happening across our country. And you're seeing some of that acutely in Oregon. At the end of the day, I just don't think that families are sitting over their dinner tables, sweating over whether or not democracy is going to be alive tomorrow. They're sweating over whether or not they can pay their electric bill. tomorrow.
Yeah.
They're nervous about their daughter that's in rehab, and maybe she's going to relapse because she's trying to kick a heroin habit. They're worried about the fact that a friend of theirs was mugged or murdered or worse by an illegal immigrant, like we saw in Athens, Georgia, not just a few hours from where I live, just a couple weeks ago. There are a lot of people that are concerned about a lot of things. I can tell you from my travels, from the people I talk to, whether it's family, friends, strangers, coworkers, everything the Democrats have been focused on in that committee and in that investigation isn't some stuff that the American people are concerned about. And that's a huge problem strategically if you're trying to win, is you're not selling what people are buying. And in politics, you want to be in the business of selling what people are buying.
Yeah, that's how you get a real marketplace, a transaction. And I just happened to stumble upon this article, which maybe a few years ago people would have cared about this. I don't know. But all gas companies in Oregon failed to gain approval for plans to meet state's climate goals. And if you tell people, oh, no, these companies aren't making their climate goals, there might be a group of people who care a lot about that. But as you said, if you are facing double-digit increases in energy costs or an attempt to deny you even access to natural gas, and then you've got the double-digit electrical costs going up, you don't care about that issue that the Democrats are completely focused on. And then they have clearly botched, I mean, in a grand style, their entire handling of the homelessness and addiction issue. And they thought that they could spend endless hours just virtue signaling about what they would do about it. And it turns out actually people really do get pretty irritated on having tents everywhere and crime everywhere, and 80-cent fentanyl pills handed out to everybody, and then they declare emergencies, and nothing seems to be urgently done about anything. And so it's really hilarious. You're right. I mean, people can smell that they are not being well served.
Well, and I think what's frustrating about the way that Democrats have gone about the homelessness issue in Oregon specifically, but you see this elsewhere in the country, is look, two things can be true. Homelessness is a human tragedy, and everyone that it finds himself in that position deserves some level of compassion and empathy. That is true. What is also true is that there is a correlation between homelessness, drug use, and crime. And it is unfair to say that, it is unfair to not allow the debate to combine that. Listen, part of the reason that we're having a crime problem is we've let the homelessness problem get out of hand. Part of the reason that we're having a homelessness problem is because we allowed our situation with drugs to get out of hand. And the reason that we allowed our situation with drugs to get out of hand as Democrat leadership in Oregon is we decided to do a social experiment, and basically allow people to do whatever they please, and now we're paying the consequences. That's the hard truth. But you can say that while also having compassion for people that find themselves in a really poor place in life, and figuring out how to help them, while also helping people that are getting mugged, getting their cars jacked, getting their catalytic converters stolen, or worse. I think that's where the argument is kind of derailed on the Democratic side, and I think voters have caught on to it.
They have, and I think that let's throw in one more thing, which ties it to the national level. It used to be not a dominant national issue. It used to be more an issue that Republicans would care about. It's the border, because you said, how do we end up with an out of control drug problem? We loosened the laws on the one end and told people they can do whatever they want. And on the other end, we literally created a super highway for fentanyl and meth to come straight up I-5 and be brought in unlimited quantities across a completely unsecured southern border. And we also started flooding cities with illegal migrants that consume enormous amounts of resources. They even are displacing the aid that was supposed to go to the homeless, which is insane. Like, why do you do that in the middle of a homeless crisis?
Right. Well, and I think the Democratic version of how they've talked about the border and its effects on especially the drug crisis, the analogy I've used is like, look, if my house was on fire and I threw gasoline on it, you might ask, hey Dave, why did you throw gasoline on your house that's going to help make the fire bigger? My answer would be, well, the gasoline didn't start the fire. I'm just like that. That's the sort of the illogic that Democrats are using. That look, there to be clear, there was a drug problem in the United States because of opioids and things like that before the border went completely out of control. So to say that our drug problem is because of the border, sure, that I think that's probably a little unfair. However, it is totally fair to say that by having a lawless border that has allowed fentanyl, a cheaper, much more dangerous drug, mostly manufactured in China, to come pouring over that border, that's throwing gasoline on a burning house.
Yeah,
like that's what they're doing.
Well, and they did more than that. They also got rid of all the fire extinguishers and defunded the firemen. So it's like they not only said throw gasoline on this already burning fire, but then let's make it almost impossible to do anything about it, even if we decided to, because they just changed Measure 110. There were some, I think, reasonably positive changes that occurred. But are they going to do it with a police force that's less than half of what it needs to be in Portland to deal with this? It's good that they've given them these tools. They probably will save more people because they'll be able to compel them into treatment. But unfortunately, that treatment also doesn't exist because they failed to deliver for almost 4 years on the treatment promise that they said Measure 110 was going to fund. So they've screwed up in so many different ways that it's impossible for them to clean this up before the election, isn't it?
No, it is. And, I think obviously, there was a Measure 110 fix, if you want to call it that was just passed in the Oregon legislature. Here's my thing is at the end of the day, it's not like people in Portland are going to stop using fentanyl because Tina Kotek signed a bill. That's right. That's not exactly how drug addiction works. The fire has already started. What happened in the Oregon legislature was them, at best, stopping to throw gasoline on the fire. Fire's still burning.
Yeah,
you have to do stuff to put it out. I would argue that's why more has to be done. This is anyone that thinks that whatever bill passed in Oregon a couple weeks ago is we fixed it, all better. I got news for you. I am going to imagine that crime will persist between now and November.
Yeah.
Drug use will persist. The homeless problem will not disappear overnight. I'm sure I'm scheduled to be back out in Oregon end of April. I have to imagine when I land at the airport and I start driving down I-5, I'm going to see some of those tents right off the interstate. It's still a problem. And one piece of legislation doesn't fix it.
I think what is happening, and this is where we get back to the political, is I am noticing that the media is now trying to write stories that rewrite history a little bit. Like the Atlantic magazine has written an article, Why Oregon's Drug Decriminalization Failed. And it's a repudiation of some of the people who put the measure forward in the first place, who have been dealt a severe blow because they expected to expand this across the country. And that does not seem to be very likely. But on the other hand, the spin is trying to make it look like the Democrats are actually super awesome at solving problems. And they aren't. New York Times did the same thing. These things almost came out with eerie timing right after the vote in the special session in Oregon. This New York Times article, Oregon decriminalized drugs, voters now regret it. And then there was a ABC News special that was done that came out on the same day that the final passage of the bill took place. You and I both know, right? There's no such thing as coincidences. Like, oh, we were planning this for months and it just so happened to come out on this day.
Right.
they were trying to say, and isn't it great that we all came together to solve this finally? And it's like, no, it isn't great that we're in this situation. And there is some news that came out like Oregon overdose rate is the highest per capita in the nation. That was a news headline from just this past week. That's pretty damning, right? And so we're like at the most extreme, severe part of the entire crisis. And some of the media is really trying to figure out how they can rewrite it so that the Democrats can win some elections this fall.
Right. Well, the other thing I'd say too, I mean, there's a really human element to all of this that I don't want to overlook, because I do think it matters for elections. But as someone who's seen and dealt with addiction on a personal level, and members of my family, addiction is something you have to deal with for the rest of your life, right? You're always in recovery, and what these policies have done, even though there was a new bill that was passed, is you now have families across the state of Oregon that will be struggling, or have family members that will be struggling with addiction for the rest of their lives. There's not enough ink in the world that for Kotek to sign bills to change that. There are going to be some really sad stories for a lot of people to share because of the failures of Measure 110. And I think that good campaigns, and again, to get a little crass politically, good candidates are going to help highlight some of those stories, because they're extremely relatable. And I guarantee you, if there's someone listening and you don't know someone directly that has an addiction problem, I guarantee you have people in your life that do. It touches everybody. And for Democrats to have to try to explain away such a sordid experiment with Measure 110, I think it's going to haunt them politically for a while, regardless of what bill passes out of the legislature or not.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think, as you said, good candidates, but also well-funded campaigns that actually drive this message, because the media is, too much of it functions as an arm of the people who are running the state to really expect a true accounting at the ballot box for who needs to be replaced and who is truly responsible. But it will determine, because there's also some other issues here in the state where they've engaged in what you might call a strategic retreat, right? Like on tolling, which is a really, really unpopular thing, especially in the areas where they're planning to engage in it. They have decided, the governor has decided to back off on it, but only until 2025, and only for the highways and not the bridge. And some of that gets lost in the shuffle, but they're just going to come back with more as soon as they get through the election. So they just want to survive the election.
I wish it'd be like slightly more obvious, but we're holding it back until. So just say you're holding it back until after the election. That's all. I mean, that's what they're actually doing. I just wish some politician
would say
it. Like I at that point I'd be like, look, don't hate the player, hate the game. I get it. I just wish they'd admit it. It'd be funny if they did.
And they're also not solving the problem. They're funding the 100 tons of what they are trying to sell as cure, because in the case of tolling, there's an editorial in the Bend Bulletin that says, tolling or no tolling, Oregon needs a reckoning for state transportation costs. It's true. It's just like saying, well, we need to make sure everybody can have health care, so we'll pay for it with the government, while healthcare costs continue to go up at a geometric rate here. And so then, you end up just writing a blank check that there's no way, if you don't do anything about the cost side. And then, of course, we know that you can't just have the government start giving people all kinds of benefits in order to deal with inflation that's occurring. You have to do something about inflation. Yeah. You can't just say, here's a bunch of money, because actually that just makes inflation worse ultimately.
I'll be honest. I'm sorry, I got a cough coming in. Bear with me. My biggest pet peeve with Oregon transportation, though, and frankly, if I was governor of Oregon, I don't know, sign an executive order, whatever I need to do. Like, I'd be a dictator on this if I could. The stretch between Portland and Salem, the giant straight line, I would make the speed limit on that 75 tomorrow. I don't
Yeah.
get why it's like 60 miles an hour for like this giant straight line for an hour. It drives me insane.
Yeah, well, you have 3 lanes too. That's the other thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not a traffic expert. I just know that I've come so close to getting so many tickets for speeding on that stretch of highway for going what's a normal speed on any other interstate in the United States of America. So that'll be my only. If I ever run for governor in Oregon, that's the only campaign platform I'm going to have is raising the speed limit on I-5 between Salem and Portland.
Well, if I could add one to that, I would say also please go after the people who are in the passing lane doing 62 miles an hour in a 65. They create giant traffic jams, which is the source of accidents, of people like having fender benders and running into each other. And then you see these folks that want to do 95 miles an hour getting really irritated and swerving in and out of it, when you could just have a nice free flow of traffic. It should be, if we could change the objective to being the efficient, high-speed flow of traffic that is safe, I think you'd actually have real highways. And they obviously, there's some places they should just be adding a lane. They always add lanes after people are completely annoyed that there's traffic jams all the time for no apparent reason other than the fact that they had no idea all these people were going to drive down this highway.
I guess my only point is I don't think there's anything that personifies woke liberalism more than having an interstate that has a speed limit below 70. That's my only point. It seems soft to me.
Yeah, no, that's about right. It is funny how that happens in so many states. There's some really high speed limits in some red states that are doing really well, right?
No, I know. Yeah, we do great. So there's a stretch of interstate in Louisiana. The speed limit's 80. It's fantastic.
Well, and that was the whole idea, is to get someplace. But so there's some other issues that they're going to probably strategically retreat on. I can't think of one right now, but there's several that I know where they said they were going to wait. And there's also ones where they've come up with sort of Band-Aid solutions, right? Like this housing bill that they passed should produce more housing. It doesn't solve the homelessness crisis that we think exists in the cities, which is often tied to addiction and so on. But there is a shortage of affordable housing in many places, which was caused by the government's own land use laws. So they got one part of the government fighting another part of the government, and then they said, "Hooray! We passed a bill where we have the government fight with itself less to solve a problem everybody says needs to be solved."
That's right. Look, I mean, this is a little bit more national, but in terms of Democrats retreating, I'd argue that they've also like almost done a full retreat on the border as well. I mean,
they started to, yeah.
There's for you go back a year, maybe even less. If you ask national Democrats if there's a problem at the border, they would say no, absolutely not. The border's fine. Or they'd say, or they were proud that they were a sanctuary city. How many cities are you seeing now? Liberal cities, New York, right? New York, I think was one. I think there were a couple of others that have announced that that they're basically cracking down on illegal immigrants inside their own cities when they were proud to announce they're a sanctuary city a few years ago. They all admit that there's a problem at the border now. That's the only proof that you really need, that the fact that Democrats are even acknowledging that the border exists, is admission that there is a problem, let alone them actually admitting that, yeah, we probably do need to kind of stop this sort of unorganized inflow of not just immigrants, but I mean, you've got human trafficking, drugs, you name it. It is just a crisis down there to epic proportions.
Yeah, it was funny how the New York governor, you remember when that group of illegal migrants were released and they were flipping off the cameras and they had beaten up some cops in Times Square, and it was all on video. And the governor got really angry. He says, "We've got to get those people and arrest them and deport them." Oh, wait, we're a sanctuary state. Well, I guess we can't do that then. So they let them go and they fled to other states.
Right.
And then they got everybody, feds and everybody trying to chase these people across the country. It's like the Keystone Cops of border security. And they, but Hochul goes, especially after the Lake and Riley thing, where, that happened of course, in Athens, Georgia, but the person that did this had run afoul of the law in several different places in the country, and
Yep.
just simply nothing was done about it. And then they came to this city that thought of itself as a sanctuary city, and then you got these people who were all for sanctuary cities, but they're like, but I didn't mean that. No, we don't want murders, except it was always about people that committed crimes that the Customs and Border Patrol were looking for so they could deport them and then
Right.
make sure they couldn't come back in. That it was, they like to think that sanctuary cities were that somebody going and working, washing dishes at a restaurant, that a sanctuary city was going to prevent the feds from coming and deporting that person. The feds weren't trying to get those people.
Right.
They were trying to get the ones that were involved with, gang warfare and felony armed robbery or murder, and say, you're out of here. And those cities would be like, no, we'll handle this. We've got our own way.
Well, and again, it goes back to what I was saying on homelessness, right? There's this fine line between compassion and enablement, and I think what the Democrat Party has become over the last 20 years is, again, I think as human beings, we're all compassionate on some level. We never, no normal human being wants to see another human being suffer. If someone wants to come to this country and work hard and make something of their life, I think we're all supportive of that in principle. But at the same time, allowing people to come in illegally and then commit crimes and then let them go so then commit more crimes, that's not that to me isn't compassion. That's enablement. At a certain point, you have to understand that your over compassion for one group of people is going to start to negatively impact other people. And in the extreme case, like you saw in Athens, it led to the death of a young woman. That's not an indictment on every single person that's crossing the border, but it is an indictment on the people that enable it.
Yeah, and it's also results in a recognition of the people in the community that it's neither humane for the people that are addicted and committing the crimes, whose lives are out of control or destroyed anyway, many of them. But it's also terrible for the people who thought they could just live their lives and their children could go play in a park. That was over. And so it has reset people's expectations about this stuff. If there were merits to any of these policies that they've experimented on with, they've discredited those policies entirely by the way they've executed it. And it was a perfect storm, because in Portland, and this has happened in other cities in the country, you also have a district attorney who just didn't believe in prosecuting low-level crime. So what did you get? You got an enormous amount of low-level crime that just went on and on and on and on. And he would literally just have a revolving door. Like, the police would do their jobs and arrest somebody, and 4 hours later, that person was out committing crimes again. And there was story after story after story of this. There's stories in Portland just recently where a Chinese gentleman was fishing in the Willamette, and he got his arm shattered by some strange dude that just came up and just started smacking him with a metal post. And that just happened the other day. There's somebody was walking down the sidewalk in downtown Portland, I think it was on the 28th of February, and he saw a couple of guys that were sitting next to what looked like a classic car, and he was just walking with his girlfriend from a parking place to a restaurant in the Pearl District, a place that people do exactly that all the time. And he said, "Oh, nice car," and they just kept walking, and within a few seconds, they were beating the hell out of him so severely that he's in a coma and has been for about 10 days. And I saw a post from one of his family members on Nextdoor. That's how close this is. And this is something that has really affected the community. These are unbelievable stories, because just like what happened with Lake and Riley, Athens, Georgia was not crime central. It was not dangerous for a young woman to go out for a job. But now it apparently it is. These are things that should have never happened. Now we're shifting gears now too, because a lot of people know that the economy is still a problem. That even though inflation technically slowed, although I think it's picked up again, prices have not come down. And prices are way out of whack from where people's incomes are in order to keep up with it. And then I just saw the headline today: Oregon loses jobs for the first time since 2021.
Yep. No, you're seeing a lot of stuff slow down right now. I mean, I think I saw something about the housing market naturally having the worst downturn since 2020. There's part of it is just prices haven't gone down, right? Even if the rate of inflation slows, that's the rate of increase slowing. Nothing that doesn't mean going down. And people's salaries certainly haven't kept up with that uptick, right? I mean, salaries have increased slower than inflation has, so people are hurting. And I would argue that there is a bit of an economic bubble here. Maybe not a bubble in the traditional economic sense, but bubble more in this sort of tension where something's going to have to give eventually. Either you're going to see folks really sort of start to suffer quickly, or you're going to have to see prices drop in some way. And either way, I think it's going to be to the detriment of the American economy, no matter what happens. Like there's going to be some pain there. And again, I don't think the Democrats or President Biden have any particular plan to solve it.
No, they don't, or at least nobody perceives that they do have a plan. And that's where it manifests itself in politics. So there's another story that I think is very interesting to mention. Balance of power in Oregon House could be up for grabs this year. This is just from the other day. And I know that you've kind of stayed tuned in on what's going on with the Oregon House. We just had a decently positive session. At least Republicans can feel somewhat good about how we came out of that session. There were some constraints imposed on the session because there were things Democrats couldn't do if they wanted to get it done in a short period of time. And they didn't want to cause senators who got nothing to lose to walk out and say, the hell with this. Right. And so all of a sudden, the byproduct was that something might have gotten done, but also maybe the Democrats can read polls too. And they know that they could be in trouble in the 60 member Oregon House.
Look, I think you're going to see some big changes in the Oregon legislature this year for sure. I think most of the real opportunity is on the House side, as it typically is in a presidential year anyway, just in terms of how the Senate seats kind of flip in terms of, because Senate seats are every 4 years, and it's half of them that are up.
Only half of them, yeah.
So really in terms of Senate pickups, it's really 2026 that they get competitive. I also think, to be blunt though, I mean, I think the political strategy on the Senate side kind of created their own roadblocks. I mean, you have 10 senators that are now ineligible to run because of frankly, a botched political strategy. I mean, completely candid. So now you're going to have a little bit, I guess the plus side is you're going to see a lot of new fresh faces on the Senate side that come in. Fresh faces usually mean a good thing, new blood, that sort of stuff. But that I know on the House side, they've recruited some great candidates. I think that they are definitely eager to try to do something big this year. And, I've always been bullish on the fact that presidential years generally are now better for Republicans than they are for Democrats.
And it needs to be flipped.
For most of us that have kind of been in politics for like the last 20 or so years, that hasn't been the case for Republicans. Typically, we do better in midterms. We're usually on our heels on presidential years. That paradigm has shifted for a lot of different reasons. We could probably do 3 live streams about just that. But bottom line is that there's a lot of tailwind here for candidates that are willing to pick up on it.
Yeah, I think there is. And I think that that kind of brings us a bit full circle back to the presidential race, because now that we have 2 nominees, and I still have this sneaking suspicion that Joe Biden's not going to be the ultimate nominee, but I will say one thing: that State of the Union speech that he gave, that wasn't about informing the nation about the State of the Union. It was the state of Joe Biden's re-election campaign speech. And if the Democrats wanted to replace him on the ticket, then having Democrats on national television chanting 4 more years during the State of the Union speech probably wasn't the best way to bring that about. and it put to bed a lot of the stuff that was being said about how he might not make it all the way through. So your original gut instinct that he would definitely be the nominee, that was based on the process, right? About how far along you are. And I think it's still possible that you could get to the Democratic convention, and if they wanted to, or if he just couldn't make it, then they could do something at the convention, and they'd control that a little bit more because the delegate situation would be pretty stable. There wouldn't be some, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or somebody else.
Obviously at this point, obviously at this point, RFK I think is probably even disqualified from that situation because he's running as a
anyway.
I guess he's back in, but for all intents and purposes, he's running as an independent candidate. So,
but if you wind the clock back before he dropped out of the Democrat primary, if he had stayed in and been competitive, he could have won a lot of delegates and jeopardized their little plan.
Sure. It definitely could have been. I think at the end of the day, the barring some major health concern that Joe Biden could have, which look, the probability of that is greater than zero. He's obviously not in his prime. So, and I'm not going to sit here and try to predict on whether or not he's going to have a major health episode between now and the Democratic convention. But assuming there is none, I do think Biden is the Democratic nominee. The process for which, even if it's controlled at the Democratic convention, I think no matter what, the process is still messy because the way that it works when you're going to a national convention, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat convention, is all the delegates that show up are bound, meaning that they are required to vote for whoever won their state caucus or state primary. And each state has rules governing how those delegates are bound. But no one gets to vote, goes to the national convention, getting to vote for whoever they want. They have to vote for somebody.
Well, the Democrats do have super delegates, right?
They do have super delegates. That is correct. But really, what will have to happen, though, is Democrats will have to unbind their delegates, right? So basically, you would have to have some sort of motion or vote at the national convention to say, okay, now everyone, we're unbinding the delegates. Everyone votes to unbind. And then there's a process to nominate people to, on the Democratic floor and who the Democratic presidential nominee is going to be. As even in the most controlled settings, that's still going to be a very messy process. But
and what I was just reading a short time ago is that the polling is starting to. This is the one thing that's going to weigh on them, because time will run out for them to change their plans. Ultimately, they will not have the option of replacing them on the ballot. And President Trump has really continued to climb in the polls, especially now that the primary process is sort of settled out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was reading that he's starting to settle right around the 50% mark. Well, you get to 50% in what has been a 46 to 48 or 47 to 45 type of situation. That's actually the beginning of this just being could be an electoral landslide potentially.
Yeah. Well, and I think I know we're probably getting close to the end, but what I will say is that the thing that everyone should remember when it comes to the polling now is, the fact that Trump is leading in these. Excuse me. My 3-year-old brought something home from preschool yesterday. I'm still kind of dealing with the consequences of that.
Life happens.
Yeah. The fact that Trump is leading these polls now, he was losing all of these polls at this point in the race 4 years ago. So we are in a much different world than we were in 2020, even in some ways stronger than 2016. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic that Republicans are going to make gains in November. I did see that Bobby Richardson just commented that he missed the whole show. Should we just start from the top, Kevin?
Well, fortunately, this is recorded and anybody can really replay it, but I would really like to encourage people to share it. And there's a story that's too long to dig into right now, but something that I came across that we can maybe talk about with greater perspective another time, something that Dick Morris calls the young male backlash. And it was young men who, so in the low to mid 20s, 18 to 26, who are getting fed up with being forced to not being told that if you act like a man, you're bad. And that's an interesting thing. And he presents some evidence to this. But there are some political shifts happening. We know with Hispanics, we know with even black males actually are starting to get fed up and not identifying as close with the Democrat Party as they once did. And that only has to shift from like 9% African American vote for, if that goes to 15 or 18%, then a whole range of swing states become unwinnable.
Right.
For
Democrats.
For Democrats, yeah. And so we know that there are things moving, and this could be another one to keep an eye on. And this could be a year where we look at what changed, and it really shifted dramatically in another direction for a decade or longer. You've talked about the realignment. It's clearly happened in terms of working class versus college educated. There's male and female votes seem to be skewing in two different directions. But now we've got all these crises that have been unleashed that I think people, I don't know, I got to believe there's at least a generation that's not going to be interested in anything that sounds like Measure 110 in the rest of this country for a generation.
I think it just goes down to, the fact that people are fed up. They're ready for something different. And I think Republicans have the ability to offer that solution to them.
Well, we're there. And so we want to ask everybody to make sure that they not only share this show with everyone they can, but make sure that they stay tuned for the future episodes here, because this is getting more and more interesting. We've been very fortunate to have you join us here tonight, Dave. Really appreciate it. Our now officially regular guest on our show, Dave. And we will look forward to hearing where we're at in April, because there's still a lot more to happen, especially in some of these states. They're going to have primaries. They're going to determine what happens in Senate and U.S. Senate, congressional races, and even in the state houses around the country. So we'll stay tuned. Thanks so much for joining us, Dave.
Take it easy.
Have a good evening, everyone. And we'll be back tomorrow night with the next episode of